I really hope that you can, because this computer was not working before and now it is. Again, probably it's obvious. No script for this video, as always. I'm just going to be talking about all of the books that I've read this past year, 2025, and some of the books that I want to read going forward. And I'm doing this from my bed, obviously. This is the season of seasonal depression, unfortunately, and actually this is false advertisement. These are all books that I read a long time ago, particularly from 2023. So for example, the Oppenheimer book that the movie was based off of, and among other things. But yeah, those are not the books that I will be talking about today. The books that I will be talking about today are largely, I think I have a lot of them at home, and a lot of them are more short story compilations and poems, as well as essays. Yeah, so most of these are not full novels, but I think that it's important to have a pretty diverse profile, because literature doesn't only comprise of novels. There's also novellas and poems and short stories and all these other wonderful things. And one of my favorite things that I've read are lyrical poems, lyrical poetry, as well as lyrical prose. And this is something that I myself write a lot, as well as a lot of the works here are things that I read for school, because I have the most wonderful professors who assign the most wonderful works. And so that's what keeps me going through school, is being able to read these amazing things. Even though actually I'm not a literature major. I have a Russian minor, but not not literature, unfortunately. Although I would love that, because I already have two other disciplines, which is economics and sociology. But of course, I read in my free time. I try to make the best habit of it as I can, and so in addition to that, I'm also writing my first novella, and a lot of these books I've taken inspiration from, and I'm reading not so much as research, but to find some grounding for the themes that I want to pursue in my novella. So the first one is Rabindranath Tagore, Omnibus 1. This is 1,000 pages, but it's not all one work. So basically, the most famous work, he's one of two Nobel Prize winners that I have, that I'm going to introduce to you today. He's the first one, and he did win it before the other person, who I probably know who it's gonna be if you watch my other videos. But yeah, so he wrote Gitanjali, which is basically this collection of poems. I think it's 100 something, and basically dealing with Eastern spirituality and philosophy, and tackling a lot of the same questions I think that Tolstoy asks, but from a more Bengali, and this is also very important. He grew up during when West Bengal and the whole of India was being colonized, but particularly West Bengal was the Victorian sort of capital of colonial India, and so for a long time. And so Tagore grew up under this climate. So all around the world during the 1860s and 70s, all these important things were happening. But in India, it was pretty much the peak of the worst of the British Empire, which is actually very hard to tell when that exactly was, but it was during the Great Famine. And I don't think he wrote Gitanjali exactly during that time, because he was quite young, but it's quite profound, all of these poems, and he won the Nobel Prize specifically for this. So I highly recommend reading it if you're interested in Tolstoy, but you would like to see the perspective from India. And because I think that this is very valuable, we don't often really hear about these questions being talked about from the more Eastern standpoint, where usually we're used to like more Western interpretations of these themes. And so I think that Tagore offers a different point of view, and it's important to keep in mind this like colonial context, because I think this was like truly his rebellion against this sort of colonial nihilism that was being, perpetrated among the more elite upper echelon of Bengalis, which is actually what Tagore was sort of a part of. He was quite, like his heritage is more upper echelon, but of course, it also has his Nobel Prize acceptance speech, which is, I think, quite short. Yeah, it's like only a couple pages. And then The Post Office is another work that I'll highlight, which is a short play that he has, because of course he was a dramatist. And there's not so much stage direction, like it's mostly dialogue, which is really the opposite of like what I'm used to. If you're used to reading like Chekhov or anything, there's usually a lot of notes and stage direction, but this is very bare bones. I won't spoil what it's about, but it's very good. And then Creative Unity is a collection of like essays and lectures about kind of the universality of art, and he writes a lot about different poets and different writers, including like Shelley and other like Kalidasa, Indian writers and Western writers, and how, and yes, of course, we have Milton's Paradise Lost and Shakespeare. I mean, he practically covers so much in this. I don't know. It's quite long. I think it's a book. So yeah, that's a lot of what this is. And then of course there's a couple of his short stories. So this is a very heavy book. I think we got it from India when I was there. I think my grandfather probably got it for me, but I'm sure you can find some of his work in a compilation in a bookstore or something. I won't say Amazon because I don't support Amazon, but yeah. First one. The second author that I will be talking about is one that I also reread. So for context, this is kind of a lie that I read this whole thing. I obviously haven't finished all of it. I read up to Creative Unity, so that's why I only talked about those. And I'm making my way through the short stories, but obviously it's very, very large. So it's my hope that I'll be able to finish it, but again, no promises. Then we have Dostoevsky, of course. I can't make a video without mentioning him once, right? So obviously Crime and Punishment I've read again before. I'm rereading, or I reread it once in February, and I just think that this book is quite timeless. And a superficial reading of it, like, I don't know, you kind of don't really get, I feel like, everything that this book has to offer. Like, you have to read it multiple times, and also at like various different ages, because I first read this when I was a teenager. The second time I read it was earlier this year when I just turned 20, and so I think that I would like to revisit this in like 5 years. Like I will be rereading this probably every 5 years, but in any case, it's not really like a lot of labor to read, actually. Like, I think like the prose itself is not so dense, but there is a lot of storyline. But like once you know the storyline, it's quite easy to follow. And yeah, I love my copy and I never want to lose it, because I even did like drawings. That's something I do. I picked it up from Pushkin because he did drawings of his characters in the margins, and that's just something that I like to do, to visualize the characters. But yeah. Is there another one here? yeah, like I don't really know why, but I was drawing a lot of faces in here. But I think, like we all know, like if you read this, I think a good accompaniment, which I will talk about him later, the other Nobel Prize winner in this collection of books is Camus, and he wrote L'étranger, which is The Stranger, and that book is very heavily like the plot is very similar, and the way in which the themes are dealt with are different, but essentially it deals with the same sort of moral conundrum. And so if you're going to read this, I highly recommend reading the Camus' The Stranger to also complement it, because I think you can never have too many views. But yeah. Next, let's save that for later. Next, I'll talk about, keeping in theme with the Russians, Lermontov. So I actually don't have the English version with me right now, but I did have it. Yeah, I did have it at, like, in where my other apartment is. I just right now I don't. Yeah, I don't know where it went. But this is the small little pocket Russian version. Герой нашего времени. So this is in English a hero of our time. And if you like anything to do with Byronic heroes, you'll absolutely love a hero of our time. The main character is sort of this very Byronic character, and he's quite, like, he calls himself a fatalist. There's a whole chapter about called The Fatalist, and it's basically a recounting of this man told from various perspectives, mostly his own because it's a diary entry, but there's also, I really don't want to spoil anything that happens here, but yeah, like, he basically is fighting as a soldier who fought in the Caucasus, the wars in the Caucasus Mountains, which is like present day Georgia. And so, but there is quite a bit of, I want to say, like, racism in this book, and this is not to endorse anything, but this book is a product of its time. I mean, it's called A Hero of Our Time. It's a product of its time, and the attitudes in it are very much, like, historical. So yeah, if there's any caution, it's that. But yeah, I really like this small version. I found it in a bookshop, a used bookshop, so it's quite old, but it has all of the idioms that they use, because there's quite a few, like, very specific idioms and references, and so yeah, for the Russian version. I don't know that they have that for the English, but yeah. Герой нашего времени. Then I have a winner of the Pulitzer, which is Jhumpa Lahiri, and one of my favorite authors, and one of my favorite books. This is The Namesake. This copy is very old too. As you can see, it's been mutilated by someone, probably my older sister, because this is I think we probably got this, like, in the early 2000s. But yeah, so she's a very, very talented, skilled prosist, and he, yeah, this character, the main character, his name is Gogol, which is the name of a Russian writer. So if you are interested in Russian literature, and you're like me, who is also, like, Bengali, you'll also see, like this is literally the perfect book for you. And it's basically about the power of a name, and its cultural significance, and how exactly that can change when you're an immigrant and you're put into a new cultural context. Yeah, and so here it says, the immigrant experience the clash of cultures, the conflicts of assimilation, and most poignantly, the tangled ties between generations. So very much like Fathers and Children by Turgenev, this book is just, I don't know how to explain it. It's very dear to my heart because I think I relate a lot to the main character, but I also think she writes it so well for the perspective of a man, particularly like Indian men growing up in the U.S. I think it's insightful to have that perspective. But yeah, I just love this book, and I think it's probably one of my favorite books that I've ever read. But she won the Pulitzer for Interpreter of Maladies, which is another book that's amazing. And she wrote this after, but this just holds like, this is very dear to my heart. Then switching it up a bit, I have more of like a horror, I don't want to say horror. These are like a set of very dark short stories called Things We Lost in the Fire by Mariana Enriquez. She is a writer and journalist from Buenos Aires in Argentina, and she has won the Booker Prize, the Kirkus Prize. Like, I'm just reading off the back of this because I absolutely love the way that she writes. I've read 2 of her other books. One of them is called Nuestra Parte de la Noche, which is like Our Share of the Night. And then Things We Lost in the Fire is a set of short stories. That other one is a novel. And then The Danger of Smoking in Bed is another set of short stories she wrote after this. Personally, I read that one first, but I read this one this year, and I think this is certainly the stronger set of short stories for me. It's very, very specific to the Argentinian cultural context. And the type of gothic horror, it's kind of a type of gothic horror that she situates within that. And I don't know exactly how many short stories are in here, but you will get through this thing in like one day. Like, it's a very fast read, despite it's like 210 pages, so it's not very long, but it's certainly something that you can power through, because it's like once you start reading, it's very hard to stop. Unlike, I think, a lot of the other novels, I think The Namesake you can probably get through pretty quickly as well, but certainly like Crime and Punishment, no, I think if you're invested enough and it's your first time, Crime and Punishment you'll get through fast, but definitely this one and Tagore are very slow books that you kind of have to pace yourself with. And that's not to say that like they're bad, it's just they take a while to really solidify like the concepts that they use, because they're very like, I think they you would get a lot more from them if you slow read them than power through, because you'll miss a lot of the very nuanced points that they both make. Not to say, it's just a manner of how the books are written and what themes they tackle. So it doesn't have anything to reflect on the merit of the book itself. Lastly, actually not lastly, I'm gonna do like a shorter round of like shout outs, I guess, at the end. But the next one I have is, you guessed it, my favorite author of this year, the next Nobel Prize winner, and my literary husband, so to speak, Camus. And everyone is like, I think I talked about this before, Camus is a philosopher. He's not really a philosopher. Like, if you read his work, I think everyone knows a lot of his early works, and I watched a video about this earlier. Most people know about his earlier works. They don't really like have a good understanding of like how this philosophy developed and how his viewpoints changed. And he's very much more of a writer and an artist than a philosopher. Like you won't find like any like proofs, right? Like he doesn't write proofs really. It's all of it is contained within a narrative. So the first I had already read L'étranger a while ago. That one is a very like French lycée like type of book that you read in high school, which is it makes sense because I think the prose is the easiest to understand. It's very lucid and clear. But of course, as his career progressed, these thoughts became more nuanced, and so the prose reflects that. So to read some of his, so actually I do have one of his earlier works, which is personal writings, and this is like lyrical prose that I was talking about earlier. It's a lot of his early work. So the wrong side and the right side is his first the first prose work that's contained in here, and it's very very beautifully written. Like I think he takes like a very not like romantic view of nature, but very like naturalist, I want to say, view. Like the way that he describes nature is absolutely beautiful here, and within the lyrical prose there's little narratives, such as like one of them is about a lady who like orders her coffin and constructs her tomb much longer before her death, and she sees that people have left flowers in the front of the tomb because they thought that the tomb had no flowers in front of it, and that was sad, and so they left the flowers there, and she sees that and she's like, well, I haven't even died yet. It's very interesting, all of these. So yeah, and then we have nuptials. Nuptials is another really beautiful piece of work in here. And it's really hard to explain exactly what it's about. You really have to just start reading it. But again, the prose is dense and probably it benefits from being read like one chapter at a time. And this is from, I believe, at least Nuptials and The Wrong Side and the Right Side are from very early on in his writing career, in his 20s. So, great. Then towards the end of his career, there's L'exil et le Royaume, which is like sort of short stories, I guess. They're not really compositely a novel, but they certainly touch on like the same theme. So I have this amazing original, I don't know if it's a first edition. I think it's published a little later, so I'm not gonna like, I got this for $1. But yeah, as you can see, it's quite old and I'm really worried it's gonna fall apart. But this is the original French version in French. And yeah, I think like in these short stories you can really see where like this notion of absurdism, like I think towards the end he was really stepping away from like that traditional view of absurdism, which is indifference. These are very emotional stories. Of course his prose is still lucid, but like there's certainly less detachment in these stories than there are in his earlier works. Except for personal writings. Personal writings is very intimate, is how I would describe it. Like, if there's a form of literary intimacy, you'll find it in here. Lastly, my favorite work that I read this year is La Peste by Camus, which is just like the most interesting. If I had to like compare it to like something, I would say La Peste is to Camus is the brothers Karamazov is to Dostoevsky, because like truly deals with like a lot of these like dialogues that are between the characters can be seen as an extension of the same themes that we saw in the brothers Karamazov. Particularly, like, I don't know if this page will be the same for everyone. This is also like a compilation of a lot of his works that I just have. So, like, the concept is that this town in Algeria has been infected with this epidemic, a plague, and it's killing everyone. It's highly contagious, and so they have to be isolated, and they close the perimeter, and many people get stuck in this town who don't live in the town. And we follow a bunch of different characters. Like, for example, there's a journalist named Lambert, and he is from out of town, and he wants to desperately escape to go back to his love. And so that's one moral conundrum. And then the other is of Rio, who's a doctor. And I think this really encapsulates like a lot of what people kind of like dunk on for L'étranger. Like, it's not really about the indifference, but rather this notion of the absurd can foster a love for humanity that we see in this doctor. And so you'll see. I'm not really explaining it to its best ability, but it's only 272 pages. It's not very long, and you can certainly get through it. And I love this edition because I have also The Fall, which is another. I won't talk about it today, but and then Decisive, and then of course on suicide he had a couple of essays that are in the myth of Sisyphus. And then Reflections on the Guillotine is another popular essay that's in here. But yeah, everything else, all of my shoutouts, I'm going to read from my Goodreads. So I don't have all of these with me because I read a lot of them online as well. Even though I love reading, I wholly prefer reading like paper copies, but of course I don't have the money to purchase books all the time. So the first one is probably going to be Whose Fault by Sofia Tolstoy. She was Tolstoy's wife, and if you don't know, Tolstoy wrote towards the end of his writing career a short story called the Kreutzer Sonata, which is based on the Beethoven Kreutzer Sonata, and this is a very beautiful piece. If you go back and you listen to it, I think there's a really good version with Vladimir Ashkenazy and Ishak Perelman, and so these two, it's a violin and piano duet, and it's very, very romantic and passionate. Like, if you listen to it, I think you can see exactly why Tolstoy would think that it's so tempestuous. And so he wrote a rather like misogynistic story about why, like, it's about a wife that like cheats on her husband, but we really don't know if she actually cheated. But the husband is a very paranoid man, and so he gets mad at his wife for playing this piece with another man, the Kreutzer Sonata, with the violin. She plays the piano, and so it's basically about how he kills his wife after she plays the piano with this man, which sounds very stupid, but I think more so it highlights the power of art and more of like the power of an intellectual intimacy, and this is something that Sofia Tolstoy responds to because she didn't agree with the ideas, the misogynistic ideas that I think Tolstoy had in this work. And so it's a portrait of like basically the same story, but through the wife's perspective, growing up and marrying a man who was much older than her, and then falling in love due to intellectual intimacy only with another man. And yeah, so I won't spoil it for you, but I did write my final paper on it, and I'm very very passionate about it. So I highly recommend reading that. It's absolutely stunningly written, and she does not get enough credit as a writer and a diarist as Tolstoy, because she had like, I don't know, she had very many kids. Like she was popping out kids like every year. So the fact that she was able to write this and also raise that many kids and be stuck under this burden of raising a whole family while Tolstoy kind of, did whatever, it's quite amazing. Then The Meek One by Dostoevsky, I read this for a class. Again, very good work. It's about a very similar theme. A girl who commits suicide. She kind of falls off of this building. She throws herself off the building, I should say. And so it's quite, again, it's told from the perspective of her husband. But you'll see, like, it's actually based on a true story. So I won't say more than that, but it's very sad. But again, it's what Dostoevsky does best. It's a piece of psychological work. And then The Cherry Orchard, this is a play by Chekhov. Of course, I read a lot of his work this year. I really enjoyed The Cherry Orchard. It's definitely a play that's never meant to be like staged. I don't think anyone will quite stage it as he wished, and I know he's very picky about that. But yeah, I love the way that he writes his stage directions, and this has been a great influence on me as I read my own work. So yeah. Then lastly, I'll highlight Bulgakov, who is one of my favorite, like 20th century, I would say, authors. He was writing during the Soviet Union. Stalin hated him, but two of his works are really my favorite. The first is The Master and Margarita, which is, I can't even really describe what it's about, but I think it was magical realism before like the concept of magical realism sort of arose, and it deals with a lot of the same themes that we've been talking about, like religion, faith, and especially within the Soviet context. If you're interested in that, I think this is very good. And then A Heart of a Dog, which, like, I'm ending with this because I genuinely think that even if you don't like Russian literature or the idea of Russian literature, I don't know why you wouldn't like, but if you think all the books are too long and too boring, or like you think of like Anna Karenina and you're like, oh, it's so long, I'm never going to be able to read it, you must read Bulgakov's Heart of a Dog. It's very short. I think it's considered a novella, and it's more like science fiction. You'll obviously notice the parallels to Frankenstein first. I think that's what everyone notices. It's basically about a dog that comes alive because they sew in a man's pituitary gland into his head. And this isn't even the worst because it's based on true, like, what people were actually doing in the Soviet Union. That, like, people were doing much worse things in real life. But imagine if the dog came to life and became a human. So that's sort of the plot of Heart of a Dog. And it's very interesting because not only does it have implications for like how we treat progress and science, and it tackles eugenics like quite well, actually, because back then we had like this idea of like the Soviet man, the perfect sort of guy that will yield to like all like communism in its purest form and not have any reservations about it. And also we see the perspective of this doctor who creates the creature, if you want to put it in like Mary Shelley terms, I guess. But Bulgakov was a doctor, and so he understood the body quite well, and I think that you will really see that in his prose and the way that he writes the scenes. So it can be quite uncomfortable, but it's certainly worth your time to read that. And it's very short. It's one of the books that you'll get through like very quickly. I think it might be 120 pages or something, but it is a novella. So yeah, those are everything that I read this year. It's not everything I read. I actually read a lot more than that, but it's my favorites, and I think I did quite well. considering that I'm just trying to like stack all of them too. I don't know why I'm doing this. I don't do outros, but maybe this can be like the thumbnail. I don't know. Anyways, I hope that you read some of these. Again, I apologize. This isn't a scripted video, and I tend to like stutter and talk over myself, which is horrible. I don't really do YouTube videos, so like this isn't my profession or anything. But yeah, thank you for tuning in, and I will see you in the new year. Oh yeah, I didn't mention what I'm planning to be reading. So firstly, I want to finish Tagore, and secondly, I want to read Paradise Lost by Milton Friedman. Those are my goals. We'll be updating. Bye.